I'm going to talk about how we talk about what we've got. And I guess Nick spoke about the importance of openness of information and integrity, and how this is kind of a values, beliefs issue and agenda, and particularly the risk of the lack of engagement with your customer and with your customer's customer. So I'll take those kind of issues as my starting point, and look at how companies can engage. Where do you start communicating about what you're doing around sustainability, and how you really get the benefit out of all of that work, how you leverage it, leverage those investments that you're making in your story, because there has to be a payoff. So, it's clear sitting in the UK, there's a plethora of kind of labels or standards, not just across food products, across all types of products and services. And ethical logos can be really important from the perspective that they're auditable, they're verified. They're a great way of engendering a level of consumer trust in your product or your brand or your service. And they kind of provide assurance for consumers that somebody that knows what they're talking about has done some work on this. Some big complicated issues, I might not understand them as a consumer, but somebody who does has taken care of this for me. But they're not a communications tool. Likewise, historically, a lot of companies have focused their sustainability comms budgets around CSR reports or corporate social responsibility reports, which kind of outline to their stakeholders the progress they've made in engaging with society or the environment. But Nick referenced trends sort of building around integrated reporting, and not having a standalone CSR report, but reporting in a single report across a range of non-financial metrics. And that just reflects the fact that sustainability is really an approach that's integrated across all of business, rather than something that exists as a separate department in the companies that are really doing this well. And I guess just like ethical marks or logos, corporate reports can be really important platforms. They can be great sources of information, and they can really serve to crystallise an internal approach to sustainability. But I think that the crux of the point here is that the people that you want to identify with your brand or your service or your product, the people that you want to become loyal to your product, are not the people that read these reports. And even if they were those people, I'm not sure that these reports would do a good job about communicating or selling your story to them of the journey that you're on. So the real key, and what will kind of be what I'll move on from, is taking the great data that sits behind all of this work and turning it into something that connects with your audience on, as Nick said, that kind of heart level. So to understand how to do that, how to turn that data into a kind of meaningful communication strategy around sustainability, we engaged a UK company called Futerra. They're a communications agency that specialise solely in sustainability communications. So they were established about 10 years ago, almost over a decade ago. And so they're real industry leaders in this area. They were doing this before it was kind of sexy. And they worked with us to think about how New Zealand companies might talk about sustainability more effectively, making sure that we're realising some of the returns on this. As you can see here, their client base demonstrates the fact that this communications issue is not just of interest to some niche green brands. These are companies kind of across the blue chip spectrum. And just another side point, Futerra, not just with representation in the UK, they've expanded into Europe, also offices in the States, and looking at expansion into Australia. So both in their geographic footprint and also in the clients that they're dealing with. They do have a global perspective on these issues. So I think when Sam and I sort of sitting in London talk to some of our companies in market, and we ask them, what are your key messages around sustainability? What are you telling people over here in the UK? 9 times out of 10 they say nothing. In case we get shot down, we don't want to stick our head above the parapet in case we're attacked. And I think that's, to a certain extent, an understandable response. On the face of it, it might seem a little bit safer. But actually, I think in the long term, it's a more risky position. It risks getting left behind. So if you think about a company's effectiveness at communicating their sustainability credentials or the journey that they're on in terms of sustainability, you can think of it along a continuum, basically at one end between green hush, and at the other end between green wash. And the key here is making sure that we get the balance between these two things, getting the value out of our progress, but not leaving ourselves exposed. And greenwash, I think, is really all about miscommunication around sustainability actions, whether that's intentional or unintentional, overstating or kind of painting everything you do with a little bit of green, blurring your intentions, somehow just confusing or misleading your consumer. But equally ineffective, green hush is not talking about where you are on that sustainability journey. Taking an approach that thinks, I'm going to wait until I've got absolutely all of my ducks lined up behind me before I talk about anything in case I'm exposed. But that doesn't allow you to leverage the benefit of the progress that you've made along the way in your consumer's mind's eye. So in order to get that balance right, to balance the hush and the wash, the key here is matching your performance where you are with the perceptions that people have of your brand, and working to improve each of those things in step with the other. And I just point out that this diagram is to a certain extent a little bit misleading with a nice big X on the top here. That's not meant to represent the fact that there's some perfect spot we're aiming for. There's no end state to sustainability. Sam and Nick both referenced that kind of ratchet clause, the fact that the minimum bar is just rising, and as we understand more, we're understanding how to do better business and be more sustainable. But the important fact here is recognising where you are and having a vision of where you want to be, and a communications plan for how you're going to get there. And if you think about getting too high on the perceptions axis before you've got the performance to back it up, that's a really dangerous position to being exposed. Likewise, you move too far along the performance axis without people knowing or understanding that you're on that journey, and you're not leveraging the benefit out of it. So it's quite interesting to think about where you or your company might be on that quadrant, and how you build your reputation with regard to sustainability in step with your improvements in performance. One way of doing that, about sort of understanding that journey, Futera have developed this helpful graphic which kind of explains the stages that you might go through as a company in terms of embedding your sustainability activities into your communications. So at level 1 here, you've kind of got just a position that avoids risk, that's not talking about anything proactively, it's just trying to stay under the radar and not to get flagged, and if you do, just to kind of firefight. And I would go so far as to say a lot of New Zealand companies, certainly in our market, are probably unfortunately at that position, or maybe even at a kind of level 0 of just not even wanting to know that there might be some issues. The next stage, level 2, is all about being seen to do good. The focus of your communications at that point might be about getting a good PR story. But you'll then begin to back up that image with action that begins to address some of the major sustainability issues that are particular to your company or your business. And you might begin to incorporate sustainability-related activities into your regular communications. But that might well be through a sub-brand that can kind of be used as a tester or acting as a mouthpiece for that activity. A good example, the Tesco Organic is a sub-brand through which they can kind of talk about some of the work they're doing around organics. Then you're starting to increasingly see the fruits of the labour, the spin-offs of that green performance will manifest. Maybe on the supply side, there'll be some operational efficiencies, some cost savings. On the demand side, you'll start to get ahead of your consumer. You might start to tap into some latent demand. And increasingly, sustainability will become an approach to everyday decision making. So that's all about living green rather than just doing green. And that then means that sustainability starts to become a core part of your brand, both internally and externally. And you'll start to be seen as leading the agenda. Really good example of that is a UK company called Innocent. They make smoothies. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. But everything they do around sustainability is integrated into their core brand. There's no separate messages about sustainability or separate messages about their brand. It's just their brand. That's just what they do because they make great products, they make good smoothies that are healthy for you, they happen to be good for the environment, and we love you. It's all great. It's all part of their one core brand. So how do you do that? What do you actually need to think about? Futura suggested 3 core principles, I guess, for ensuring effective communications around sustainability. And I'll just run through these and then go into each in a little more detail. So the first is about knowing your why. Talking about your why, not getting distracted by all the great whats that you're doing. Secondly, making sure that your messages are accurate and relevant to your audience. Can people relate to what you're telling them? 26 grams of carbon on a bag of crisps, is that something that they can relate to? And then thirdly, just the fact that that good news sells on sustainability. Sell your consumer a low carbon heaven. Don't sell them a climate change hell. Just tell your positive story. So know your why. Understand your why. Talk about your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's driving it? Don't be tempted to talk about your what's until you've got your why sorted out. There will be any number of companies doing the same what's as you, whether that's having saved 50,000 grams of carbon in your factory, or printing double-sided, or getting a fair trade logo. None of that, all of that is great stuff, and consumers want to know that you're doing that, but there's nothing in that will distinguish you from your competitor. But what will distinguish you is your motivations, your story, the vision driving your company, how your company sees the world. That will be unique, and that's something that people can't argue with. That will really set you apart. And it's about using that why as an umbrella for your communications and the engagement that you have with your customers. So the why is all about, as I said, tying in with your brand values, the vision that you have for the company. It's about personalising what sustainability means for your company. It makes your communications more convincing, and again, it sets you apart. As I said, as you move further away from that, talking about the what's, the less authentic or the less unique or interesting or engaging those messages are. The other thing here is don't be afraid of a stretching vision. A challenge that excites people or kind of galvanizes support or interest around your company. If consumers feel that they're on a journey with you, they're much more likely to stay loyal. And again, I'd reference example that Sam gave of Marks and Spencer's, that's very smart, coming out and saying by 2015 we're going to be the world's most sustainable retailer. Firstly, they get to define what the world's most sustainable retailer means, because I don't know that anybody particularly knows that, so they get to write their own rule book. And secondly, it generates a little bit of a buzz. People think, gosh, what does that mean? That sounds really exciting. That sounds like something I would kind of want to keep an eye on. I want to be part of that. And they'll come on that journey with you. So know your why. Personalise what sustainability means for your company, and let that rationale drive your communications. Check yourself. Are you accurate? Are you relevant? It might seem pretty obvious. It's not rocket science, but we live in an information-rich world. Consumers are connected. Communications environment is very liquid. So your customer is more savvy today and better equipped to check out your claims than they ever have been before. And they'll spread the word for you if they feel that they can't trust you. So what you're saying has to be true. And what's interesting here is give consumers evidence of the proof. They don't necessarily want to know all that proof. They won't necessarily understand all that proof. But just referencing it will engender some trust. So, direct them to a sub website that will tell them how you've come to all the conclusions that you've come to, or the metrics that you've been through to develop your carbon footprint, or something like that. Maybe only 1 in 10 of consumers will actually go that step and peel back that extra layer and look for that information. But just the reference of it will imply that you've got nothing to hide. So that's really important. And secondly, be relevant to your audience. Know what pushes their buttons. And Futera have done quite a bit of work on this with some people called Culture Dynamics in the UK. And this is basically about values, modes, segmentation, which is basically just a fancy way of looking at people's values and motivations for decision making, rather than segmenting them on your more traditional kind of age or sex or class kind of typology. So it helps understand what's motivating the audiences that you're talking to, and how to effectively target the messages that you've got to those particular different audiences. And they've come up with 3 kind of basic types of personality. The first being your pioneers. So these are the people that are motivated by inner-directed motivations. They're the people that do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. They're very motivated by ethical concerns. And the key to messages connecting with this group of people is all about talking about ethical living or doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. That kind of vision will really inspire these types of people. They're about 25% of your typical kind of consumer base. And you've got, in contrast to your pioneers, you've got your prospectors. These are your outer-directed people. They're motivated by status and esteem of other people. They're not necessarily not interested in sustainability, or they're not necessarily a profitable market. You will be able to capitalize through these guys, but it's all about messages that connect with them in terms of smart living, or doing the clever thing. These people will ask, what's in it for me? How will this make me look good? So in this case, it's all about telling your sustainability story. This is the smart thing to do. This just makes sense. You want to lead this kind of stuff. That's how to look good. They're about 40%. And your final group are your settlers. They're more security driven. They like tradition. They're concerned with home base. That for them sustainability is all about their children growing up with the same values and in the same environment that they grew up. And so messages that connect with them are all about safe living, or doing the sensible thing, doing something because it's reliable or consistent. And they're about 35%, the remaining 35%. So what's key here is sustainability messages will be most effective when they target that group according to their values, according to what motivates them, to their motivational drivers. So just check your messages, make sure they're accurate, make sure they're relevant for your audiences. And the last rule, good news sells. Talk up the positive. Bad news sells newspapers, but good news sells sustainability. Sell the sizzle, don't sell the sausage. There's, I think I've got about 8 tips or tactics here that I'll just run through that speak to how you do that, how you sell that good news. So it's about keeping it personal. It's about telling your sustainability messages in ways that people can relate to my region or my town or my house. Link those messages to people's lives, to their lifestyles, and make sure your calls to action seem achievable for them. People naturally just want to be important, they want to be useful, and often sustainability messages just kind of leave them feeling a little bit helpless. It's all very big picture stuff. People might care about development, but they can't stop global poverty on their own, so it's about giving them something little that they can personally do, and that they can feel good about doing, that's tangible and that makes a difference. Really good example of that is a campaign that Rainforest Alliance did in the UK with a tea brand, Lipton. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Rainforest Alliance, but they're similar to kind of a fair trade type scheme, but it also has an environmental aspect. So their campaign, Your Small Cup Can Make a Big Difference, was all about keeping it personal, So the ad talks about the difference that a consumer can make, respect for nature, care for the local communities, better income for tea growers. So consumers can see, I buy this type of tea, I'm doing great stuff for the environment, I'm caring for these communities in Africa. They can clearly see the positive difference, but it seems achievable, I can cope with buying a cup of tea, great, and I'm having all this positive impact. It's very achievable. Keep it positive. Avoid helping people switch off because you're just feeding them negative messages. Make things pleasurable for people. Paint mental pictures that people want to remember. This is kind of a classic what not to do ad. When the UK government about 3 or 4 years ago started engaging with the UK population around climate change messages, it came out with this TV ad that was basically a girl getting read her bedtime story, and it was all this cartoon about how the UK was going to flood and there was going to be no more land left and we're all going to disappear underwater. And they literally had these sort of drowning puppies and drowning kittens. And you kind of think, yeah, is that a mental image people want to remember? Talk about scaring people, painting pictures that are not too pleasurable. So needless to say, that got pulled off the air pretty quick. Don't nag people, they get enough of that. Don't use guilt. I find that kind of funny. Avoid boring people. The average consumer in the UK, I think, gets about 5,000 communications messages a day that they're kind of bombarded with. So you're vying for a very limited space of attention. Make sure you don't get lost amongst the messages. Humour's a good way of doing that. Empathy and emotion. I think most people outside of New Zealand connect most easily or most naturally with something that's got a face, whether that's an animal or a person. I think New Zealanders are a little bit of an anomaly in that respect. You see a beautiful picture of Central Otago, tussock land, and it's just so beautiful. You get that little heart flutter. But I don't think that's normal. I'm a freak, but outside of New Zealand, that's not so normal. People tend to need something populating that landscape to feel that they can relate to it. So how that kind of relates to communicating around sustainability. If you're doing something great for your local wetland and you want to tell that story to consumers outside of New Zealand, don't necessarily talk about it just as an isolated wetland. Talk about all the great the great impacts that means for bringing the nice little froggies back, or whatever native species of bird that's helped repopulate. People will find that a lot easier to connect with, and I think the direction that our tourism campaigning is going in is evidence of that. Less kind of beautiful landscapes and more beautiful landscapes with people. Key. Balance your language. The scale of the problem needs to fit the scale of the consequence or the action. There's always a risk with sustainability communications that the scale of the challenge just seems so massive. You have visions of Al Gore on a cherry picker and it's all very overwhelming, and how do we deal with that? And then we tell people to walk out of a room and switch the light off, and we'll solve climate change. And the scale of the solution just seems minor in comparison. So make your solutions sound much more heroic, and present the scale of your solutions in proportion to the scale of your problems. Terminology is key. People like to think of themselves as smart and savvy. They don't like to think of themselves as efficient and boring, so play to that. This is kind of a helpful schematic that Futera put together with kind of different industries down the side here. And you've got kind of a traffic light system along the top. So green words, terms that people like and understand and relate to. Orange words kind of used with caution, and red words, words that consumers might misunderstand or not feel that they're able to relate to. So, you don't want to think of yourself as an eco-safe driver. You want to think of yourself as a savvy driver, because that's a little bit cooler. Don't necessarily talk about microgeneration, because people don't want to admit to not knowing what that means. Talk about things that kind of say what they are, zero waste. I don't need very much background knowledge or understanding of waste issues or life cycle management issues to kind of get a basic handle on what that might mean.